Every day is Day with the sounds of Elvis. Join Lee and Joe with a new 3-hour show every Saturday on Elvis Express Radio.
Oh, so there we go, the fourth special hour as promised. This week we're continuing our interview with Mindy Miller. Joe Crine talks with Mindy Miller, and well, if you heard last week, which I'm sure you did, you'll know how fascinating she is to talk to, and what a lovely voice she has. She just captivates you.
Yeah, she does a really good interview. She's not one of those that answers questions with one word and stuff. You know,
they are tough ones.
She's such a sweetheart. She really is, and I think everybody's going to enjoy this part. And then, of course, next week will be the third part and the end of it. So everybody will enjoy it.
I can't wait for this next part. And the good news is we're now there at this next part. So
there you go.
Joe, introduce your interview, sir.
Mindy Miller, take it away. Hey, this is Joe Crine from Elvis Express Radio and Elvis2001.net, and this is part 2 to the Mindy Miller interview. Mindy, how you doing?
I'm good, Joe. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I enjoyed talking to you the other day.
I did, too. I thought that you asked some really interesting questions, and I look forward to the second part.
Okay, there you go. What did you and Elvis do for fun?
Well, during that time, we had a lot in common, as I said in part 1, and one of the things I wish we would have done, I'll say this first, is to be able to horseback ride together. We both loved horses. He had horses at Graceland, and I'd been riding since I was about 7 years old. And so one of the things I wish that we would have done together is, ride horses and things like that. But when I was with him, we were either mostly on tour or we were in Las Vegas or Palm Springs or we were at Graceland. And at Graceland, during the last part of his life, which was the last couple of years, he wasn't getting out as much in that sense. I mean, he was still playing touch football and things, but when I was with him, he didn't. He wasn't riding around in the golf carts as much. So, I mean, the things that we did for fun were just very ordinary things. I mean, again, for his fun, he would watch TV, he would read, we would read together, we would see movies. Sometimes he would get in the car and he'd just want to drive around. He'd want to drive around and he believe it or not, he loved graveyards. And I did too. And he thought they were really, really interesting. And he would love to talk about the old souls and things like that. And yeah. I remember one time we got in the car and we drove to, I don't even know which graveyard it was, but we drove to a graveyard and we would talk about souls and where he thought they went and did they go to heaven or was there a hell, and we'd pray for them and things like that. But mostly it was things like reading or visiting with friends, playing the piano, entertaining. I remember one time we went. We went to a funeral in Colorado, and he had just bought me a car, and he wanted to take the car out and go driving. And I didn't know where we were going to go, and he didn't know where we were going to go. We were just going to start driving around, and we ended up in a gas station, and he went out and wanted to get a reaction. He loved getting the public's reaction.
I was going to ask
when that. He loved getting a reaction from people. And he got out of the car because there was very little gas in the car after he bought me the car. So he said, let's take the car out for a drive. And he bought me this beautiful white 455 Hurst clutch, 45 Trans Am, which today is worth a fortune. They're worth between $35,000 and $50,000.
Sure. They got a Holly four-barrel on them with a Hurst shifter.
Oh,
yeah,
incredible car. And stupidly, I sold it. And I've tried to find the car, and I actually did call the DMV, and they said they know who has it, but it's in storage. It's garage, and they wouldn't tell me who. So probably that person will come up at some point and put it up for a lot of money. But so he bought me the car. We went to a gas station, and he was going to go pump his own gas. And one of the guys in the car who was sitting in the back seat, because we always went with, bodyguards, said, E, why don't you stay in the car and let us do it? He said, no, because I want to do it. And I knew that he wanted to get a reaction from the people there.
Uh-huh.
So he got out, and the guys were sitting in the back in case there was a problem. They were always ready to, get in there. But Elvis could protect himself. He knew karate. He could shoot. He could fight. He could box. He was very, very able to take care of himself. And he didn't need backup, but he had it, And so he started pumping the gas in the car, and as he started pumping gas, people were going up to pay for it, and they were looking, and they didn't say anything to him. And then I guess I didn't know if they thought that he was a look-alike or not, and they went back into the car and said, I think that's Elvis Presley. And then people would get out of the car and come out and they started, kind of making a circle around him. And at some point you couldn't even see him, and then the bodyguards finally got out and intervened. And they said, are you Elvis? And then he said, yes, I am, and all that. And I'm still sitting in the car. I didn't get out. And finally the bodyguards took him and said, Elvis, you're gonna cause a ruckus here. You need to get back in the car. So he got back in the car, and he took out his credit card, and he said to one of the guys, he said, make sure everybody's gas is paid for, and if anybody needs any new tires or anything, make sure that they're all taken care of.
Wow.
And, who does stuff like that, really? And he paid for everybody's gas. It was at the gas station, and he talked to people, and he wanted to talk to his fans and tell jokes and all that. But the bodyguards would get a little concerned. They, anybody, you never know. There are crazy people out there, and this was, I think, 1976 when he bought me the car, and he would do fun things like that. That to him was fun. And then another trip, I remember, we were in Colorado. We went to his friend Kennedy had a funeral, and we flew literally the last minute from Graceland. We were at Graceland, and Elvis said, get your purse, let's just go. We didn't even have time to pack. He didn't pack, I didn't pack, whatever clothes we were wearing. Guys drove us to the plane. We got on the plane. We landed in Denver. I think it was snowing. And I had I don't know what I had on, some little outfit, no coat, no nothing. And we went to the funeral, and Elvis paid for the whole funeral. But I remember at the end of the funeral, he wanted to go out and get something to eat. Well, Elvis didn't normally go to a public restaurant to eat.
Right.
And this time he wanted to, because he wanted to get reactions again, because the police officers, had given him a police uniform to wear for the funeral. And Elvis loved badges. He was like a little kid. He loved badges. He loved uniforms. He loved military uniforms. He loved all that stuff. And this was part of the child in Elvis. And so they gave him a suit and a hat and a badge and the whole thing, and he was so proud of it, and he made sure he had pictures taken of himself, in the suit. And I just watched him, and it was just so much fun to see him because he was so cute. And he said he wanted to go to his favorite restaurant, which I think was the Coal Mining Company or Denver Mining Company, something like that, as I recall. And we went there, and he ordered the famous peanut butter and banana and jelly sandwich and had it delivered to the table. And there was other food and hamburgers and all kinds of stuff. And we sat I think we were sitting in a private room. I don't think we were sitting publicly. And Elvis at one point said, I'm going to get up and walk around. And I looked at him. I said, you don't normally just get up and walk around. I said, are you sure you want to do that? He goes, yeah. He goes, I want to get some reactions. And he would do this for reactions. And he started walking around the tables. And he'd stop at the tables and go, how you doing today, ma'am? How you doing today, sir? Are you having a good meal?
Jeez.
And he would start walking around the tables. And I looked at the guys. I said, what do you think? I said, do you think you need to follow him? They said, no, he's okay for now. We're going to watch him. He was like a kid in a candy store. He got up. He started shaking people's hands at the tables, at the dining. You go, oh, what are you eating there? Oh, that looks good. Oh, what are you doing over here? What are you doing over there? He would do stuff like that for fun. I mean, little, simple, cute things for fun. He walked all around the restaurant talking to people and schmoozing with them and picking up their tab. And, just crazy, fun, sweet little things like that, Joe. Physically, you know, he and I personally didn't get out and do a lot of fun stuff like that. He loved to drive his cars. He'd love to get in a certain kind of car and drive around on the studs, or he'd get on the motorcycles and we'd go riding on the bikes and things like that. You know, and take drives around town. He loved to do that. He loved
Will he pull up next to cars and let people see, oh, that's Elvis Presley on that motorcycle? I mean, would he do that on purpose?
Yeah, sometimes he would, but you see, in those days, you didn't have to have a helmet. Now, in California, where I grew up, after a certain time period, after a certain year, you have to have a helmet. So, you know, you could be Brad Pitt or any of these guys that drive in L.A., and they all do. They ride on bikes to get to their interviews and to get to the studios and things, because they can be seen in the cars, and they don't want. And the problem in L.A. is we have so much traffic, and you literally sit there, and anybody can come up to your car and, you know, see you. So a lot of these guys that are major stars and celebrities, they get their bikes and they get on the bikes because you have to wear a helmet. You can't tell who's in there. In those days, if you see early pictures of Elvis, he wasn't usually wearing a helmet. He was out there, his face was out there, his head was out there, and you could tell it was Elvis. Sometimes he would pull up to a car, and sometimes he wouldn't. Sometimes he'd avoid people, but mostly it would be late at night, because that's when he had the freedom and there wasn't as much traffic out, where he could really go kind of balls to the wall on the bike, right, you know, and really ride, you know, and do things that were fun like that. During the daytime, you know, he couldn't, and during the day he slept a lot too.
Right. I'm sure you saw Elvis time. I mean, he slept during the day and you were up all night long.
Yes. Yeah. I didn't go to sleep. Yeah. I mean, my schedule was his schedule. His schedule was my schedule.
What was his schedule, basically, Mindy? What was his schedule?
It was different when he was on tour than when he was at home, but he basically lived the same at home as he did when he was on tour, to keep that kind of a schedule, because when we were on tour, we would go to, you know, sometimes you do 2 shows a day in the same city or in a different city. So sometimes we do one afternoon show, get right back in the plane, and go to another city that was close by, and he'd get ready and do a night show there. And then we'd go back to the hotel usually, and he'd stay up pretty much most of the night, because what people don't realize a lot is that when you're doing a show like that and you're sold out, and every show he did was sold out, the energy level was so incredible at the stage level that nobody could just go home. I mean, the musicians, the singers, nobody could just go home and go to bed. You just couldn't. The energy level was so high. And I used to always sit to the side of the stage. The girlfriends sat to the side of the stage. So we didn't really get to see the show from the front like most ordinary people or the fans do. We sat at the side because they had to bring us in and take us out before the show ended, so that we'd be in the car waiting for Elvis, because they would rush him out. Joe Esposito would usually rush him out, and the guys at the end of the song, and he would literally be in the car driving away when the announcer would say, "Elvis has left the building." We were gone. We literally were gone. You could barely hear the announcer say that as we drove away. That's how fast it was. So we sat to the side of the stage, and you could feel the energy level. It was so high that there was no way even I could just go back to the hotel or go home or go to sleep. So we'd go to the hotel. We'd usually, the first thing is we eat something because we'd be hungry, and Elvis would be starving and thirsty after the show because he'd put so much energy into it. And so we'd usually eat. We'd sit down and eat. He'd change, eat, take a shower, eat, and then we would visit, usually with the guys. If the Sweets were around, we'd call the Sweet Inspirations in. Sometimes he'd sing some more, but he'd sing, gospel songs that were very peaceful, that would kind of lull him to sleep, or we'd just talk, and he'd always want to talk about the show. Well, was it a good show? What could I have done better? How could it have been this way? He wanted feedback from everybody. He wanted to know that the show was good, that he did right by the fans, that how could he make it better the next time. Then after we would visit with people, we'd go into our room which was either hotel or at home, or whether it was in L.A. or Graceland or wherever it was, and that was our private time. And we would usually visit and read and talk and watch TV. We'd read from the Bible. We'd sing. Sometimes we'd lay down, and he'd want to sing more even. And a lot of stuff he would want to sing was Roberta Flack, and I would take harmony, or he'd take harmony. And he would black out the room, turn all the lights off. We'd lay in bed next to each other, hold hands, and we'd just lay next to each other quietly on our backs. And I'd say, Elvis, what do you want to sing? And he'd pick a song, and we'd sing, and we could sing for hours. We would just sing. And that one time he turned over to me and he goes, honey, you got a real nice voice there. And I said, I leaned over and I whispered in his ear. I said, hon, I said, so do you, but don't give up your day job. And he just howled at that one. He thought that was so funny. He just laughed and laughed and laughed. And I said, well, good, I can make you laugh. He said, yeah, honey. He said, you got a good sense of humor. So, I mean, little things like this. And, so we would do little sweet private things after we visited with everybody after the show. But he'd be so riled up, and he'd talk about the show some more, and he'd say, he'd sometimes say, well, did you see that so-and-so sitting in the first row? Or did you see that teddy bear somebody threw me on stage? And he'd talk about little things like that. And he was very, very aware on the shows, who did what, and he remembered people. And, the bright lights hurt his eyes because of the glaucoma, but he could see things that were going on, and he loved to make funny things on stage. But we would finally go to sleep maybe 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. But now it depended, because if he had a noon show the next day or an afternoon show, he couldn't sleep in. And normally we would sleep in till maybe 3, 4, 5 o'clock, and then wake up and have breakfast. But if he had a noon show, then we'd have to get to sleep earlier, maybe 3 o'clock in the morning. And then he'd have to get up and do a show. Now, if it was a show in the same town, he'd get up and do the noon show, and then go back to the hotel and rest and relax between shows, and then go do a night show, usually like an 8 o'clock show or something. Then from that show, we would normally go right to the plane. And then we'd sleep on the plane, we'd visit on the plane, or we'd go back to the bedroom on the Lisa Marie and sleep until we got to the next city, and then get up and do it all over again. But it was a grind. And I had to learn how to pack very quickly, and how to unpack and get dressed and be pretty and do the makeup and the hair and all that. And there wasn't a lot of downtime. Yeah. And the downtime that we had, even on the plane, we would visit. But if it was really between the shows, he'd want to read. We would study the Bible together. We would talk about afterlife. We would talk about all things spiritual, Zen, Buddhism, talk about the Lord, Jesus, talk about the 7 rays. We would talk about where your spirit goes after it passes, things that just really enthralled him that I loved. So he finally had somebody with me that he could talk about those things with, because he couldn't really talk about them with the guys. They weren't into it. And he would talk more about, guy stuff, and right. Friend stuff. But the spiritual side of it was really left to the women that would listen to it or that were into it. And not a lot of people were.
Right. Mindy, is it true that Elvis never understood why he was Elvis and why he was so famous? Is it true that he questioned that? He didn't know why? Why him?
Yes. He questioned it all the time. Even when he wasn't performing, he questioned it. And people, especially on Facebook, they'll ask me questions like, well, we see these pictures of him looking dazed or confused and staring out the car window all the time. And I said, well, most of the pictures you see at that time, some of them were actually taken in the car, in the limo after a concert. And most of the time, he would turn over to me and say, I can't believe it. I just can't believe it. And I said, what? What? And he said, I can't believe that all these people came to see me. And he'd look at the buses, the tour buses were there that would bring people in from all over, the cars, people walking, people on motorcycles. And the parking lots were just packed with people. And that's why we had to get out early, because otherwise we couldn't get out. So his limo would be mobbed. We'd never be able to get out. Mm-hmm. So that's why he had to leave. The minute that song was done, he was gone. But he never understood it. And he would question it a lot of the time. He didn't question it a lot around other people, but when we were alone, he would say, why do you think I was chosen? Why do you think God gave it to me? He said, I'm nobody. He said, I'm a poor boy from Tupelo. We didn't have anything, Mindy. He said, I don't understand why God gave me all the gifts. And I said, he did give you all the gifts, Elvis. I said, God knew and still knows that you would do right by him. And that not only if he gave you the gifts would you lift God up as you do, and that you would praise the Lord as you do, and you would talk about him publicly as you do. I said, but you would sing the songs of the gospel. You would sing God's praises. You would sing God's hymns, because that's what God wants you to do. He wants people to sing in God's name. That's what, and if you read the Bible, that's what it clearly states in the Bible. Mm-hmm. I can't quote Ecclesiastes or a number, of a paragraph or anything like that, but Elvis knew that. And he, in many of his writings in the Bible, and he'd always say to me, a Bible is not read unless you write in it. Yeah. He said, and a spiritual book is not a spiritual book unless you underline and you write in it. So we were underlining all the time. We were writing all the time in my Bible, his Bibles. And he would always say, but why me? I said, because he knew as a spirit, before you ever came to earth, that as a spirit, and then giving you the entity, that you would do right by him, that you would not misuse and abuse the gifts that God gave you. And I said, and you never have. He said, no, I never have. He says, and I never will. I said, there. I said, therein is your answer, Elvis. That is your answer.
Did he like being Elvis? Did he like being Elvis Presley?
He loved being Elvis Presley. He loved it. What he emanated on stage as a performer was part of who he was as a human being. But as many times as everybody has read and they've heard him say in his interviews, the entertainer is one thing, the man is another. And they were two separate entities. But he loved being, quote, Elvis Presley the entertainer, unquote. He loved singing. He loved acting. He loved making movies. He wasn't crazy about all the movies, but he loved being an entertainer. It's what he wanted to do from the time he can remember. He was singing at 2 years old. Jesse, his grandfather on his father's side, sang. His mama sang. The Presleys were a singing family. People don't realize they all sang.
Right.
And they were all very good. But he was the chosen one, you see. He was the one that God gave the gift of stature, beauty of face, beauty of voice, beauty of hand. There was not an inch of this man that was not beautiful, including his feet.
Did he miss? Did he miss being normal? I mean, did he want to be able to go out and be with people and not be Elvis Presley? Did he ever talk about that?
Yeah, he did. He did. He missed it, and whenever he could, he went out, and we did some fun things, Right. He liked to shock people, and on a couple of different occasions, one's when he bought me a car, and we went out, and he decided he wanted to go to the gas station and pump the gas himself.
Right.
And he ended up paying for everybody's gas and all that, but he loved to shock people. He loved being Elvis Presley in the moment, even though he was, in his regular clothes, and a lot of the time he wore he wore the sweatsuits, and he had a little white kind of tennis hat that he wore all the time that he loved. That was his favorite outfit. And he wore that when he was just really relaxing. And, he loved to be Elvis Presley. He loved people to recognize him. He really did love that. And, there were more than one occasions. I know we've talked about it privately, but there were more than one occasions when we were out at restaurants. He did go out, and he would walk around the tables and like to shock people and say, "Hi, how you doing?" He'd pick up their tab. Mm-hmm. And, he would do little things like this. And, he loved the shock value of it. He had an insane sense of humor. And whenever he could get away with being crazy, he would. And we all called him Crazy. His nickname was Crazy. And he called other people crazy, too. And, one of my nicknames for him was Crazy. And he was the funniest guy. But, yes, he loved being Elvis Presley. He loved entertaining. I know at times he missed going out and just being normal. But, he taught me how to live with it. And I remember one time we were on tour, on one of the tours, and he said to me, I was getting frustrated because we were in the hotel, in the plane, in the car, in the hotel, in the plane, in the car. And, this was a daily grind, day after day after day. And at one point, I bumped my head against the wall in kind of a gesture of, oh, my God, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And he took me in his hands, and he put his hands on my shoulder, and he said, "Come here." And he took me into the other room, and he said, "Listen," he said, "I know that it can be a daily grind." He said, "But," he said, "you're going to have to learn, if you're going to be with me, how to do this." And he said, "You're not going to be able to go out. You're not going to be able to do things like you normally would when you're not with me." He said, "But here's what I do." And he sat me down, and he taught me how to meditate. He sat me down cross-legged, and we started meditating. He taught me how to meditate and then reading. And he really taught me, Joe, that you have to have discipline. And the biggest thing in his life was discipline. In some areas he had more of it than others. But you really had to be disciplined to do the kind of work that he did on the grand scale that he did it on, over and over and over, week after week, month after month, and year after year, upon years of doing this. The discipline was incredible. And so he taught me how to be disciplined and do it. And he said, you put that out of your mind, and when we're on tour or when we're doing this or that, you're not going downstairs, you're not walking around, you're not going shopping, you're not going to the movies. And he said, this is what you have to do. And he said, if you're going to be with me, you're going to have to learn to do this. And I did. And it was one of many, many, many lessons I learned from him that to this day I have helped me and I've taken with me in certain areas of my life where I've needed great amounts of discipline to get through it.
Right. Let me ask you something. Can you tell me about the first time you went to Graceland? What did you think about it?
Well, I was excited to go, and we were on a tour, and he said, I want to take you back. I want to take you back home to my house. I want to show you my house in Memphis. And I said, okay. And inside I was so excited, but I didn't want to show it. I didn't want to be overly excited, And I remember we were in the car, we drove up, and the gates opened, and it was just really grand. I mean, the driveway and everything was just grand. And coming from where I did in California, you didn't see these grand homes on sprawling land and these fabulous long driveways because we don't have the space. I mean, we do in, mansions in Beverly Hills and all that, but you don't see them. They're all behind locked walls and gates. So to be able to open a gate and see that right in front of you was huge with all these trees, and it was just beautiful. And we went in the back way, so we didn't go in the front. I didn't get to see the front drive. We went into the back, parked the cars, and the first room we entered was the jungle room. and it was a very small room. And I thought, oh dear. I thought, oh my God, and I didn't dare say a word. I thought, I wonder if the whole house is furnished like this. and I was scared. I didn't want to say anything because it was a funny looking room. It was a very kind of ostentatious, weird kind of decorating, and I'd never seen something like that. And, here I'd been in Vegas. I'd been all over, and I'd never seen something like that. So I thought, I wonder if this is his taste, because I didn't know. And he went into the jungle room. We sat down for a minute, and we just relaxed. And he wanted to visit with the guys and talk and all that, so we did. And then I forget who was on service at that time, which maids were on service. But they came out and they had a drink for us, and all right, y'all want to eat something? And and everyone's, oh yeah, we're starving. And what do you want, Mr. Elvis? And oh well, I want some bacon and eggs, and I want my bacon really crisp, and I want some toast and orange juice and coffee. And he said, Mindy, do you want the same thing? I went, sure. So when we got through visiting, while everybody was cooking in the kitchen, he showed me around the house and introduced me to, Dodger, Grandma Dodger, and Aunt Delta was there, and Gitlo was there, his little chow dog, and showed me around the whole house and said, this is this, and this is that, and this is this.
What did you think of the rest of the house?
Well, it was very red. It was very... as I got into the rest of the house, I went, oh, thank God it's not the jungle room, And
that wasn't Elvis. That was not Elvis's taste. That was one of the girls' friends' taste.
Yes. I didn't know that at the time, but afterwards it was very red and velvety. But I thought it was very pretty. I liked it actually, and I thought it was very southern, and I liked it. It was very different, and it was very different than the jungle room, and so. He took me around the house and showed me everything, and this is the music room, and this is the living room, and the dining room, and all that. And then he took me to the front door, and then we stepped out to the front porch, and just the most spectacular view, Joe.
Yeah.
Because we had not driven up to the front door. So I remember standing there, and I looked out, and Elvis looked at me. He goes, well, honey, what do you think? And I said, Elvis, it's just beautiful. I said, you have beautiful taste. He said, yep. He said, I bought this for my mama. I said, I'm sure you did. I said, well, I'm sure she loved it. He said, yes. He said, yes, ma'am, she loved it. Like that. And it made me want to cry because, of course, by this time she had passed on. And I even get emotional even now, talking about it. But it was so beautiful. And for him to say that, I bought it for my mama, that tells you everything about him, Han, right there. In that one sentence, it tells you everything. And I looked at him, and I wanted to cry even then, and I said, yes. I said, I can see you did her proud. And he said, yes, I did. And he said, she loved this house. And he said, we had many, many happy days here. And he said, it snows in the winter, and he said to me, he said, I hope you can come back in the winter and see the snow. It's very beautiful and all that. And he had invited me back for Christmas and invited me back for certain things. But I, wasn't able to see it for certain reasons. And beautiful, beautiful house. And then I remember he took me upstairs. We went upstairs, beautiful staircase, and went back to the foyer and went straight upstairs and into his door. And then the first night, Lisa Marie was there, and she was sleeping. She was about 5.5 or 6, and she was in a big round white bed,
hamburger bed,
in her hamburger bed in the bedroom.
Yeah.
And he took me in, and we tiptoed in. He goes, shh, be very. He said, honey, be very quiet because she's sleeping. He says, but my daughter is here visiting, and he said she's visiting me now, and she's probably going to, stay a day or two, and visit with me because we had just come back from the tour. So they'd flown her in to visit with her daddy. And he bent over her and he picked her up in his arms and she was still sleeping. And he said, this is my world. Oh. She is my world.
Jeez.
And that from the whole thing of his mother to his daughter just hit me so hard. And I knew this is where his heart was. this is where his heart was, with his mother and his daughter, and, you know, he loved family. And he picked her up and, you know, held her and kissed her, and he's come around here and look at her face. He goes, isn't she beautiful? I said, Elvis, she's beautiful. She looks just like you. And she did. She looked just like her daddy. And then he put her back in bed, and then we went into his room and turned on one of the TVs. Well, he had, I think, 2 or 3 TVs above the bed that we used to watch, but he turned on the TV that was the main TV across from the bed, in the windows, you know, that looked out onto the yard, the front yard of Graceland. And shortly after, we got in our jammies and all that, and then the intercom rang, and it was one of the ladies, and she said, Mr. Elvis, are you ready to eat now? And he said, yes, ma'am, bring it on up. And so they came up with these great trays of food. Oh, my God, it was beautiful. And we sat in bed, and we ate, and we talked, and watched TV, and it was the loveliest night. I mean, it was the nicest first night at Graceland I could ever have imagined. And we just ate till our heart's content. He was starving, I was starving, and he was tired, I was tired. And then we talked for a while, and he said, do you like the house? And I said, I love the house. He said, I hope you'll be able to come back here and make many memories with me. And I said, thank you. I would really, really like that. And he was just so gracious and showed me the girls' bathroom. So, you know, I had my own bathroom. The girlfriends had their own bathroom. He had his own bathroom. We had our own closets, and he made sure the guys put all my stuff in, you know, my closet so that I had my showering. And, you know, the girls had our private place to get ready and primp, and he had his private bathroom. He liked it that way. He wanted you to come out looking pretty. He didn't want to see the process, you know.
Right.
He was very Southern, and he wanted you to come out looking beautiful and be pretty, and, you know, and I believe that to this day. I don't think that men and women should share the same bathroom. I like the old Southern way and European way that you get ready and you do the private things you need to do. I'll do the same. Then we come together. We meet in the hallway, come together, go downstairs, whatever we're going to do. And you look nice for each other. And you don't see all that private stuff that goes on. I think that should be kept private. And he believed that, and he liked that too. He didn't want to see you brushing your teeth and doing your hair and your makeup. He liked it for you to be private and him to be private, and then you come together. And so I learned a lot of different things from him. And to this day, I carry a lot of that with me, still to this day, you know.
Did he lose himself in his bedroom? I mean, they say that he would stay up there for days, and I know that he had a refrigerator up there, so there was always food and that up there. What was that all about?
Well, sometimes he just didn't want to see people. You know, he was...
Including the Memphis Mafia, including the guys downstairs.
Yeah. Sometimes he would just get in the mood, and he would be moody, and he just wanted, you know, like all of us, and me too. I have days I just don't want to see people. I just want to be alone. I want to pitter around my house. I don't want to go out of my house for 2 or 3 days at a time. Maybe I got that from him. I don't know. But there have been days where I don't go out for days. I just don't want to see people. I don't want to do anything. Maybe I just want to read my books, my spiritual books. Maybe I just want to talk on the phone to somebody, or I'll get into long conversations on the phone with friends I haven't talked to in a long time, or I want to just be by myself, get things done in my house, whatever it is I want to do. But he couldn't do that, because you have to remember he always shared his house with people. He always had people around him. That was his doing. He could have asked them to leave at any time and have the entire house to himself.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Yeah, he could have at any time. But the guys were always around in case he needed them. He wanted to know that they were there in case he wanted to go out and do something. He couldn't because he didn't want to go out by himself most of the time. He did love the guys. He loved having his friends and family around. So if he wanted to be alone, he didn't have a choice but to stay in his room to be alone. So people can look upon that as a negative or a positive.
Right.
I choose to look at it as a positive because that's the way he taught me, because that was his private time. So it's not unnormal for people to want to be alone and have their own private time.
Right.
You know, that doesn't mean it's negative. It means that they just want to be by themselves for a change. And that was his time, Joe, to regenerate. because he would give and give and give to people all the time on the tours. He would give to the guys. He would give to the people in the house. He would, do these concerts, the benefit concerts for St. Jude, for everything. So he was always doing something. He was always on the go. The man needed to regenerate himself. The only way you can do that is to be by yourself and regenerate yourself. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I understand.
And haven't we all done that? You know?
Do you remember when he first got to Lisa Marie?
I do. When I first met him, he didn't have the plane.
Right.
I believe he had a Jetstar. And he would rent the Jetstars, and we would travel on the plane on a first tour. And then after the first tour, he said, honey, he said, I'm going to get a plane. And he said, it's going to be the most beautiful plane you ever saw. And I want to say, I think he bought the plane in April of 75, if I remember. I could be wrong. But he bought the plane, and he had the whole thing gutted. And he told everybody how he wanted it, and he wanted gold faucets, and he wanted this bed, and he wanted the bed to be round, and he wanted this many seats, and he wanted to be able to sit across from each other and talk to each other in the plane, and have a table and eat and all that. I mean, it was so exciting. This was like his baby. It was like he was giving birth. He was so excited. So he'd talk about the plane. Like somebody would talk about a new car. He would talk about the plane. He said, I can't wait for you to see it. I can't wait for it to be done. He said, as soon as it's done, I'm going to call you. We're going to get on the plane. We're going to fly everywhere. We're going to go places. We're going to do things. And we did. It was really fun. And first time I got on the plane, we were walking up the ramp, and he took me on a tour, and he was like a little kid, Now here's to the left, here's our cockpit, and this is our pilot, and this is the co-pilot, and here's everybody, and this is our staff, and this is who's going to get our soft drinks for us, and he made you feel like you were the only one. Whether or not you were, he always made you feel like you were the only one. And then he'd take me through, and here's where we gutted the plane, and here's where we did this, and here's where we did that. And he said, and here's where we're going to rest between shows. He said, and this is the bedroom. He said, this is our bedroom, he'd say. Well, it was his bedroom, it was his plane. I knew better. But
right.
he would do it that way to make you feel that you were always a part of what was going on or what was a part of him, So he goes, here's our little bedroom. He says, where we're going to be. And then he showed me the bathroom if you want to take a shower, if you want to freshen up before the shows, before we land or whatever. And he was so, so proud of it. And
wow.
then, he told me that he had the lightning bolt on the back, which was to follow the TCB, whole frame of mind, and TCB on the back of the plane, and that he named the plane the Lisa Marie. And, he said, I named the plane just like you would name a boat. And most of the boats had a female name. And he said, the best name I could come up with was my daughter.
Wow.
And I said, Elvis, that was a beautiful thing to do. And because he knew that most of the boats had a girl's name, he wanted to give his plane a girl's name. And he said, the girl in my life is my daughter.
Oh.
And I said, Elvis, that's beautiful. So there was a whole little history that I got with the plane, too, And he was so proud of it, and loved to fly that plane everywhere he could. And, we would take the plane just to go get a sandwich. He would spend the money on a gas just to go get a sandwich that he liked somewhere.
Wow. Mindy, the book. How bad did the book hurt Elvis?
I never personally read it. I haven't read most of the books. I don't read them. Not because they're good or bad. I just don't read them. Everybody has their own opinion, and everybody saw him in a different light. Mm-hmm. And the thing I will say in prefacing this is that anybody that knew Elvis is going to know him differently than I knew him. Each girlfriend he had might know him differently than I knew him. Each Memphis Mafia member and friend might know him differently than the next guy. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
So Marty Lacker may have known him differently than Lamar Fike. Charlie Hodge may have known him differently than Al Strada. Sonny may have known him differently than Red. It goes on and on and on. So the Elvis you knew, or the Elvis that he showed you, may have been a different Elvis than the one I knew. And I have to preface that because I say to them, and I say to everybody, don't you love people, all the friends and family in your life, in a different way? Of course you do. I love my mother differently than I love my father. I love this girlfriend differently than I love another girlfriend. I may have more love and respect for one friend than I do another. I may share things with this particular girlfriend that I don't share with another. I may treat this boyfriend differently than I treated a different boyfriend. So everybody will have their own opinion and say, well, that's not the Elvis I knew. And rightfully so. It may not be the Elvis you know, because he is going to show himself differently to every person. Now, the basics of who he was, I think everybody got. They all basically knew he was religious. They all basically knew that he was spiritual. We all basically knew he was a phenomenal entertainer and a great guy. So we all basically know that as fans, as people that knew him. But if you were going to get into the intricacies of this man, of who he was as a man and as a human being, most of this fan base don't know that. And they can only surmise what they have seen in concert, of the pictures they've seen, the movies they've seen him in, which are, by the way, only movies, not him, and by what has been said about him from different people. And it's like I say to his fans on Facebook, you have to read between the lines, because you're going to come up with whatever you choose to believe about him. Now, what I will say about the book and what I personally experienced, and if somebody else experienced something different, that's going to be their story, and it's going to be a different story than my story, perhaps. But what I personally experienced is that there were on many, many occasions when he finally found out that the book was going to be written, that he was beyond upset. He was devastated, and shared with me on many occasions privately things that I cannot say and will not say out of respect and honor for Elvis that he would not have want resaid or known. But he was extremely upset. He was upset that this book would come out, it would ruin his career, that the fans would no longer love his music or like him, that it would be his demise, that he did not understand that why people would write a book that were friends of his from high school that he trusted, that he brought along in his life, that he bought homes for, that he did all these things for, would write a book about him in this way. And it never crossed his mind that they may have written it to help him, which was, in their defense, what they had said. Now, I don't know why they wrote it. I never questioned the guys why they wrote it. That's not for me to know. Only they know why they wrote it. I don't think Elvis will ever know why they wrote it. If they wrote it to help him, then so be it. But he did not know that at the time, and he did not look upon it that way. So he could not wrap his head around why the book was written.
Right.
And he did not know what to do about it. He was very afraid of losing his popularity, very afraid of losing a job, what he loved to do, his whole, as we say in French, raison d'être, which is your whole reason for being, was to be an entertainer, to speak God's word, to sing God's gospel. He was absolutely stymied, and he would rant and rave and pace the floors, and he had a temper, and he showed it, and he didn't take it out on me, but I was his sounding board.
Right.
On many occasions, and I would just sit or stand and listen. And I just let him talk And I wanted to be there for him, and I wanted him to get it out of his system. And once he did, he would calm down. And but he was devastated by it. There's no other way I can say he was devastated by it. I don't think it helped him the rest of the time that he lived. I think he had to live this down. But I also know, and I do want to say this, in the guys' defense, because they're all good guys, and they were all lovely to me, and I've known them and met them all, and they're wonderful, wonderful people. They were always gracious to me. They were always gentlemen. They always treated Elvis with love and respect, and they all loved him. That I know. From the deepest, darkest of their heart, well, I don't mean darkest of their heart, but in the deepest way, in the deepest meaning is what I meant. In the deepest meaning, they loved him to the core. They truly loved him. Whatever their reason was their reason, and I won't speak for them. I can't. I wouldn't even attempt to. But they were always lovely to me, and I do hold them in the highest regard. And Elvis forgave everybody, no matter what. And I always say this, that if people are still holding a grudge against the book or against the guys that wrote it, get rid of it. Because Elvis didn't. He was a very, very forgiving man, and he forgave them even at the end, that I know. Mm-hmm. And being the godly man that he was and believing in the Lord, if his whole concept was, if God can forgive you, then who am I not to forgive you? And I remember him saying this to me. He'd say, Mindy, he said, you may not forget, but always forgive. He said, because that's what God does, and he's forgiven all the sinners on the planet, which we all are. We're all God's children. We're all God's sinners. We all have sinned. There's nobody's getting out alive from not sinning,
right?
And including Elvis, and he would say that. And so the basis of who he was forgiving, with love and forgiveness. And I really do want to say to the people that are holding grudges, move on. This is 40 years later. Move on. If Elvis was forgiving, who are you to sit there and hold grudges against people and still hold anger? Because these people that are still holding anger aren't doing themselves any justice.
Right. Mindy, when was the last time you saw Elvis Presley?
The last time I physically saw him was at the end of November in 1976. And I did hear from him once or twice in 77. He called me privately, which he very rarely called people privately, but he did. He called me privately during the time I was dating him, not a lot, but he usually had the guys call, Joe or Al or one of the guys, Ricky or David or somebody, and he'd say, get so-and-so on the phone. And they'd call and say, Elvis is here, he wants to talk to you. And then they'd hand the phone to Elvis. But usually Elvis would be doing something, and he'd say, oh, give so-and-so a call. But, there were the times where he'd call and just say, hey, it's me. And you knew it was him. And my heart always pounded a little harder when that happened, because I knew that he took it upon himself to make the phone call. And he called in the early part of 77, and he said, hi, honey. He says, I just want to see how you are and see what you're doing. And we talked about some private things and reasons that certain things happened, and which, I can't share. But he was very, very loving. And, Joe, he didn't forget anybody. This man had a memory bank like an elephant, as they say. He never forgot anyone. Never. Wow. He remembered everybody. And he had a mind like, it was so sharp. This guy was so sharp. Nothing got by it. Nothing got past him. You could not pull the wool over this guy. No way. He knew what was going on all the time. He may never have said something, but he knew. And if you were out or something happened, it's because he got wind of it. He may never have spoken about it, but he got wind of it.
Really? I need to take a little break here, and
I know it's over, but life goes on, and this old world will keep on turning. let's just be glad we had some time to spend together. There's no need to watch the bridges that we're burning. Lay your head upon my pillow.
You've been listening to Elvis Express Radio and Joe Crine Talks with Mindy Miller. Join us next week on the Elvis Request Show, where in our special fourth hour we'll be continuing and concluding our exclusive interview with Mindy Miller right here on Elvis Express Radio.
One more time for the good times. I'll get along. You'll find another, and I'll be here if you should find you ever need me. Don't say a word about tomorrow or forever. There'll be time enough for sadness when you leave. Lay your head upon my pillow. Hold your warm and tender body close to mine. Hear the whisper of the raindrops blowing soft against the window. Make believe you love me one more time for the good times, for the good times.